Radical Secular, a video series dedicated to the separation of church and state and the pursuit of justice.
Hello, and welcome back to the Radical Secular. I'm Sean Prophet.
I'm Christophe Difo.
This is our 14th episode. We were dark last week because Christophe was having the time of his life adventure trail riding on his BMW 1200 GS. That's a whole other story. You'll have to fill us in later about your travels, Christophe. But first off, what an absolutely insane, crazy 2 weeks it's been since we last saw each other. I mean, 2020 just keeps making the history books. And well, Trump came down with the Rona. And in the process, he infected practically the entire national leadership of the GOP. Super spreader event in the Rose Garden, folks. And now Trump is resting comfortably at Walter Reed Hospital out of an abundance of caution. And if you believe that, we've got a souvenir Mar-a-Lago replica for sale. Cheap. It's more like an abundance of risk-taking, which is what his reckless behavior has led to. I guess it was kind of inevitable, but it was something else, I got to say. To actually get that news, I was watching Star Trek the other night, and we ended an episode, and, again, we get jerked back into the present, that this is happening. And, of course, the implications of this are huge. So, it in a way, it kind of made 2020 sort of start to make some sense. But, even then when I heard it, I was kind of like, with these 20,000 lies, coming out of the White House, I just didn't even know whether it was true. And a lot of people are kind of spinning these conspiracy theories to, is this real or is it just another Trump head fake,
Totally.
And so our next topic is going to be the Rose Garden event that seems to have turned into this biological war zone that we're talking about, with the announcement of the already toxic nomination of Amy Coney Barrett that we discussed in our last episode on Gilead. Republicans have been hell-bent to confirm their nominee despite their hypocrisy on this issue. We will update you about what we know about that project. And the head-snapping events this past week have made a lot of people forget about the worst presidential debate in American history. And that was just last Tuesday night. It seems like a year ago.
It really does.
Trump interrupted Joe Biden something around like 75 times, while Biden interrupted Trump about 20 times, yet the usual suspects all shifted into high gear, trying to both sides the chaos. And speaking of both siders, can anyone stomach the undecided voter?
I don't even know what to say.
We here at the Radical Secular think undecided voters are a complete crock of shit, and that's putting it mildly. We'll be talking more about this later. And we also have a guest today, returning champion Joe Occhipinti, who is our first guest to appear on the Radical Secular more than once. We'll be talking about climate and the airtight connection between COVID denialism and climate denialism, and why we're not likely to get a wake-up call on climate that would be anything like the slap in the face of our entire Republican leadership caucus coming down with COVID. Before we get into that, though, I first want to remind you to make sure and subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to hit that red subscribe button. And be sure to give us a 5-star rating if you're on Apple Podcasts. Tell your friends and family about our show. Word of mouth really matters. You've probably noticed that we've updated our backgrounds to better reflect our brand. We're just going to keep evolving the show and trying to get better at what we do to bring you actionable information about secularism and justice in a format that we hope is at least mildly entertaining.
We do what we can.
Yeah. We want to announce that we are now available in India on both Ghana and Savin. Shout out to our Indian listeners. We know you're there because we have the download stats. Welcome to the Radical Secular. Please contact us by email if you have any ideas about how we can help promote the secular cause in your country. And next, I want to plug the Just Words Fallacy Medium publication. Just Words Fallacy posts weekly articles from progressive and diverse authors related to politics, religion, rationality, and justice. Just Words Fallacy is the narrative companion to the Radical Secular podcast. Link is in the show notes. If you're interested in publishing your work on the Just Words Fallacy publication, here is our contact info.
Email us at theradicalsecular@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram @radical_secular. Follow us on Twitter @radicalsecular. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, podcasts at Apple, Google, Spotify, and Stitcher.
Now, let's get into the shirts.
Let's do it.
I am going to talk about my shirt first, and this is needs no explanation, really.
I fucking love it. I love it so much. It's so great. I saw this. This is Jillian, I think, posted a picture of this on the internet recently, and it was just so good.
Yeah, I mean, and it really comes down to, we're gonna get into this in the topic of our show about, this constant tone policing that goes on. It's like, who's going to argue with someone beating up a Nazi? I mean, that's what we do. That's what Americans do. We have always been anti-fascist. World War II, we were anti-fascist, and there shouldn't be anything shameful at all about calling for the death of fascists, I got to say. So that's what we're doing here. And Antifa, as Biden said, it's an idea, not an organization, and all Americans should be okay with that idea.
Absolutely, absolutely, and like I said, it's such an awesome shirt, and I think the imagery is great. I posted because I repost most of what I post on the Radical Secular Instagram feed comes from Jillian's memes, because they're always so on fire. Lindsay and I were looking at this morning. We're like scrolling through our phones down in the kitchen, and she was like, "You got to see this. Jillian was just on fire yesterday." I was like, "I know, some of these are just so good." So anyway, you should follow.
I'm so lucky. I'm so lucky to have Jillian, I have to say.
Yeah. We're both really lucky guys to have the women we have in our lives, the partners we have in our lives. They're just great, supportive people who are just like, anti-racist.
They get it. They get it.
They fucking get it. They fucking get it. And I love them. I love them both. So my shirt is in some ways connected to the, I wore it today because of our discussion we're going to have about the debate, because there were so many, it was just Trump was, first of all, obviously interrupting everybody, but it was just a stream of lies. I mean, a stream of lies, and lies that are not just bald-faced lies, but are trying to rewrite history, right? Trying to, and you can't, it is so 1984. And so like we talked about, you talk about frequently about how fascism is about attacking information, right? Anyway, so my shirt, on the front, I got this custom made, actually. It's 84 on the front, and on the back, and I'm going to turn around now, so you might not be able to hear me, but I'll come back. Hold on.
Oh, nice. It says Orwell 84, like a football jersey.
Exactly. So it looks like a baseball or football jersey, but on the back it says Orwell as the name, and 84, and then on the front you have this like little sort of 84, and so I first of all, 1984 is just such an outstanding book, and everyone should reread it if you haven't read it recently. If you read it in high school or whatever, read it again, because it is so relevant and so well done. And by the way, I listened to it on audio book recently, and the performance was outstanding on Audible also. So it is like combining all those factors. It's like a really sort of dystopian, obviously, book. But anyway, that's my shirt, and I am just so glad to be here. I think, like you said in the intro, Sean, this is just, it's such a shit show what happened this week. It was just so, I don't even know what to say about it.
Yeah, maybe before we get into that, you should tell us about your trip. Where did you go? And what'd you do?
Oh yeah. So it was wild, man. So it happened in two distinct stages, and I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. But so we rode up to Kingston, New York from this area, from the New York area, on motorcycles, and I had a GS, a red GS Adventure. 1200 GS Adventure is my favorite motorcycle. In fact, I think it's the best motorcycle ever made. It is an outstanding machine in every way, but it's big. It weighs about 600 pounds when it's full of fluid, and heavier when
that's a beast.
It's a beast. It is a big motorcycle, and it has a really high ground clearance because it's made for off-roading. Anyway, we got up there, and we slept in Kingston that night. Day two, we got out on the trails, and we were riding along, and I fell once or twice. And in adventure riding, this is called adventure riding. So these are dual sport motorcycles. They're good on the highway. They're good on off road also. But they're not dirt bikes, right? They are 600 pounds. Dirt bikes are like 200 pounds, right? So it is a distinct difference here. And they're top heavy, and I hit some dirt and I slid out. And so you fall sometimes. You're going like maybe 15 miles an hour, though, or 10 miles an hour, or 5 miles an hour, right?
Those are the worst falls.
It's right. And so the bike becomes unstable when you fall. And so, but this happened over and over again. We're riding along, and I went to hit, to avoid a gully on the side of the path, and a branch that was sticking out jammed into the radiator, and the bike spins to the left, and then I throttle up. The rear tire spins out. I fall on my left side. There's radiator fluid now. The radiator's shot. The motorcycle's done, right? The motorcycle is done.
That's a bad day.
And then it was a bad day. And Sean, we were in the middle of nowhere. No cell reception. The trail was just rocks. And we were just looking at this motorcycle. What the hell are we going to do now? And so anyway, we ended up pushing the motorcycle as far as we could push it, and we ran into a park ranger who left, but then he came back with a trailer. And I can't tell you, like 2 hours after the park ranger left us, he showed up in an F-250, and so we couldn't lift the motorcycle into the back of the truck. He didn't have a ramp or anything like that, right? So he was pretty much useless to us. And so he's like, "Sorry guys, I can't help you, but here's where you should have somebody come meet you," whatever. And we're like cursing this guy. We're like, "This Amish ass looking motherfucker, what the hell is he doing?" Like he can't help us out. And then this guy comes back like 2 hours later. We hear this rattling, and it's him. He comes around the corner. He went back to his boss, asked him to borrow a trailer, hooked the trailer up to this truck. And by the way, I thought for sure there was no way a trailer could make it back here. We're talking a rock path in the mountains.
That is like an angel of mercy right there.
My God, man. We would have had hours and hours of pushing that motorcycle. And we're talking, it's not like pushing a motorcycle on the road. This is pushing a motorcycle like think about your hiking trail near your house. Like that is what we're talking about here, right?
Yeah.
So this guy shows up, he pulls the motorcycle out. And now I'm in the truck with this guy. I got to meet this guy, Ranger Gavin, it turns out. Really nice guy, 25-year-old. Turns out he had I had these sort of ideas about who this country guy was going to be, and how I was just going to, just keep my head down, not talk politics, and, just let's get the hell out of here. This guy's helping me. I'm going to take the help. And turns out he's like a relatively progressive guy. He's been to Vietnam, where he rode a motorcycle from the top of Vietnam to the bottom of Vietnam by himself.
Wow.
Then he went to, and that same trip he went to and camped and did the hike up to the base of Mount Everest. I mean, this guy was like a really interesting guy. So we had this great conversation for like an hour as we're driving out of the woods, hauling a 600-pound motorcycle behind me. And so we get there and we get out, and I called the guy that I got the motorcycle from, and he's going to come pick me up, and his buddy's going to come pick me up. He's like, "Look, you know what?" And his buddy comes and he's like, "You want to just take my motorcycle for the rest of the trip? I mean, I don't want you to and I'm like, I thought for sure my trip was over, right? I was like, I'm going to go home. I'm going to be sleeping in my bed tonight. I'll get home at like 3:00 in the morning, but I'm going to fall asleep. And my trip continued, man.
So you had two major saves on that trip. Well, yeah. I'm super glad that you had a great time and that all worked out. And glad to have you back, because I have to say, I mean, I missed doing the show with you last week, Christophe. I really did. It's like I went through withdrawals. I mean, we got such a routine of doing this, for the last 3 months. It felt wrong. I mean, I just, we actually had made plans to go away, and then I kind of was under the weather, and I was like, damn, I wish we could just do the show.
Yeah, totally. Good to be back. But it's really good to be back.
Man.
The only injury I got was I got a bruised foot that is a little swollen, but it is a miracle that I have zero other injuries. So it was because it was a shit show out there, man. It was a shit show. If anybody wants to see it, I have some images on my Facebook, on my Facebook story that from the trip. Check them out.
Yeah. Well, speaking of shit shows, okay, we have to jump right into our content here. And that is our first question of the day is, when did Trump get COVID? And the second is, when did he know he had COVID?
Mm-hmm.
These are two very different and equally important questions. The first question pertains to how many other people were exposed to the virus by the President of the United States. The second question is a lot darker, because how many people did the President of the United States knowingly expose to a highly deadly virus? The first question is epidemiological. The second is potentially criminal. Not that there's anyone right now in our government capable of holding him responsible or even willing to hold him responsible. I mean,
exactly.
What do you think there?
Yeah, so I think this is really interesting, and so we know that what we know for sure is that Hope Hicks was as very recently, very early on, Hope Hicks was started to get sick, and she was on the plane on the way to the debate. She was there, and they knew, and she got tested. She started feeling symptoms. She got tested, and then they knew that she had been near the president and everything else after the debate. They knew this, and he went ahead and did a rally the next day, and he was feeling kind of sick during that rally. So he was starting to have a raspy throat and beginning to have some symptoms, and then he continued to go to do fundraisers for the next couple of days. This is like a sociopathic. There's two things going on here, I think, Sean. First of all, the man's a fucking sociopath. Second of all, a fucking sociopath. Second of all, what we have here is a cult of delusion, right? Of people thinking that they are just invulnerable. And this goes to our hierarchy discussion that we always have, Sean, because these are people who think that the rules don't apply to them because they see themselves as a certain place in the hierarchy, and they just don't have to follow the fucking rules.
Well, that's it. And we've got a timeline here, okay? And it does not look good for the president. There's a briefing this morning at Walter Reed, this Saturday morning when we're taping the show, by White House physician Dr. Sean Conley, in which he said that the president's COVID diagnosis had been 72 hours earlier. Oops.
Unbelievable.
Oops. Then later on, they said that he misspoke, but obviously he's a doctor. They're working on timelines. Symptoms go on timelines, and so he would kind of know that if he's working for to try to cure the president. They're measuring the time from when he was diagnosed. So I think it was 72 hours earlier, which would have put it at Wednesday midday. Okay, now.
Which makes sense because that's when we know that he started to feel something, right? He started to say he had a raspy voice, and so they probably like, oh wait, you should probably get tested.
Honestly, okay, he looked haggard. He looked horrible at the debate. Okay, I mean, his face was puffy and sweaty, and his hair was all weird, and I mean, it's just like more than normal. I mean, he looks weird on a good day, but this was something else. That's okay, and without even having any clue that he was about to come down with COVID, or maybe he had COVID, I'm thinking to myself, he is looking bad. Mm-hmm. He is. I just got this vibe of like somebody who was really, really feeling their mortality in some way, and so I mean. You got to kind of hand it to him that for a 74-year-old rage addict with a horrible diet, he does pretty good.
Yeah, a rage addict. That's so true. I mean, he was an unhinged psychopath at the debate. I just don't think we can hammer enough at the outrage is the outrage, and we all should be outraged. But it's just that this idea of this, we shouldn't be surprised that this is how they handled it, right? That they basically covered it. I mean, we didn't even know about this, right? They were not going to tell us about Hope Hicks. They were not going to tell us about Donald Trump. If they could have gotten away with it, they would have just continued doing it. If he was asymptomatic, right? If he were asymptomatic, he would just keep doing exactly what he was doing. Guaranteed. And that's because these people,
Yeah, well, it's just stupid. The rules of the debate are, which, he never follows the rules. So he shows up late. The rules of the debate are you're supposed to get tested, and anybody who's not talking is wearing a mask. And so he showed up too late to get tested, and then his family comes in. They're seated. They take their masks off. And then people from there was whoever the sponsor of the debate was. There was actually somebody in charge of COVID security, and they walked up to the Trump family and offered them, "Hey, do you guys need masks?" And they're like, "No, we're fine." So they're sitting there just knowingly exposing anybody to whatever they have or don't have. And Trump's doing the same thing. He has his mask in his pocket and he's talking about it, and he's mocking Joe Biden in this debate for wearing a mask as he is coming down with COVID. All right. So after, it's a Cleveland Clinic, actually, that was the group that was responsible. And then, so Wednesday after the debate, he tests positive, according to this timeline, according to Dr. Sean Conley, who supposedly misspoke.
Supposedly, yeah.
Yeah. But
that's bullshit.
They did not contact the Biden team. They did not contact the press. Mm-hmm. They didn't contact anybody they'd come into contact with. And what's even worse is that Wednesday afternoon, Trump traveled to Minnesota for a rally and a fundraiser at a prominent donor's house. No masks, total exposure. Okay. And at that same time, that's when Hope Hicks started feeling sick. She quarantines aboard Air Force One. Quarantines aboard Air Force One?
Like, what does that even mean? Right? I mean, they all share the same air.
There's 50 people on that plane, including the president. How can you quarantine on the same plane? The air system is, it boggles my mind. So Thursday, Hope Hicks is diagnosed with COVID. Trump begins his experimental treatment from Dr. Conley before this is even announced, by the way. Trump travels to New Jersey Golf Club, meets with another 18 donors in an indoor roundtable without masks. White House sources later say he appears tired. So he's knowingly exposed two groups of donors. These are people who are giving him money.
Exactly.
And he's giving them COVID.
It just goes to show, right? I mean, the line is, right, he can't even keep himself safe. How is he going to keep America safe from COVID-19? Because they have been flouting the rules for so long and not even doing the absolute basics, right? Wear a mask, wash your hands, social distance, right? Those are like the sort of mantra that everyone will probably know for the rest of our lives. All of us that live through this will know that mantra for the rest of our lives, right? Social distance, wash your hands, wear a mask. It's straightforward, it's simple, and it's so cheap. It's easy to do. And if you're president of the United States, you have everyone who can just basically do it for you, right? And these people are, but they refuse to do it because they don't think the rules apply to them, right? And they think everything in terms transactionally and politically. So they don't care about other people. They care about being reelected and their power and the money that flows to them as a result of that power. That's what they care about. And fucking Ivanka. I mean, that complete shithead. You know what kills me about her is that she likes to come off as she's like the softer side of Trumpism, right? But she goes on Instagram right at the beginning of the pandemic and encourages everybody to be sure to, social distance, stay home, quarantine. But then she violates that exact rules and she just leaves the house, does whatever she wants to do. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I was reading the reporting out of the Washington Post, and you have these Secret Service guys and women who now have to follow her around, right? And they request masks. They wanted an N95 mask, the super hardcore masks, right? And they were denied the N95 masks, and right, and they take their cues, and these guys are saying, they're like, look, everyone around them takes their cues from Trump, right? And a lot of times we saw this in the Rose Garden as well. People don't want to, even people who normally wear masks didn't want to wear masks because then you'll be made fun of by the president.
Yeah, exactly. No, and this is the thing. He has literally the study came out saying that he was the number one source of misinformation about the coronavirus. Okay, number one source, and also he's constantly on record as making fun of people. So that right there, it's like he's playing with people's lives, and this is where this super spreader event happened, was in this rushed confirmation to try to get Amy Coney Barrett. They're on this fucking nationalistic, theocratic, just juggernaut they're trying to ram through there, and they bring these people together, and then they turn it into a biological warfare event. They got
yeah.
And the people right now who have tested positive, okay, and I'm sure that by the time this airs, it'll be even more. But right now, it's Kellyanne Conway, Bill Stepien, the campaign manager, Chris Christie is positive, Senator Mike Lee, Senator Tom Tillis, and the president of Notre Dame University. Okay. And even after that list was made, Ron Johnson. So now they got 3 Republican senators. They're going to have a hard time confirming this nominee when they can't even meet.
What's really interesting, Sean, and I was talking to Lindsay about this earlier today, is that they thought that Amy Coney Barrett would be this sort of a positive element in going forward. Maybe that they thought they were finally changing the narrative about COVID-19. People are now talking about this and Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death, and all. Now people are talking about different things than COVID-19. COVID-19 is fading into the background, but you can't make this shit up, honestly, because here we are, and now it's right back in the front of, and now everybody's thinking about it.
Because of Amy Coney Barrett.
Exactly. You can't, the irony is astonishing. You're like, no way. Precisely because of Barrett, precisely because you guys thought you got a big win and you had to go and celebrate it. And by the way, I'm sure you probably heard this, and maybe you all have heard this out there, but right, their process for allowing people into the Rose Garden that day is that they did a quick test. They did like the rapid tests, which are notoriously not as good as real tests, right? So they did the quick tests, and then they said, okay, now once whatever, 20 minutes, half hour, an hour, however long that takes, then they are able to just go. And they're like, no, you can now take off your mask. They explicitly said you can now take off your mask. So then they would go into the Rose Garden. They explicitly flouted the social distances. People were right next to each other, hugging, shaking hands, kissing each other on the cheek.
I saw the video.
It's so astonishing.
I mean, yeah. So, the weird part is that Amy Coney Barrett herself, she was there, but she's apparently not at risk because she already had COVID.
I know.
So it's just like, this is a ship of fools. And the main point that comes clear in all of this is they don't care about the rights of Americans. They don't care about the well-being of Americans. They only care about their power and their theocracy. They are just creaming. They're as hard as a rock, just trying to just jam this thing home. This theocracy that they want to build, and they might get away with it. I really don't know. It's just, anyway. It's. I guess we gotta move on to our guest segment, but this is just it's very frightening, and it's a good lead-in really to climate change, because climate change is the same problem. We've got the same failure to defend, the same mad rush for that last little bit of profits out of fossil fuels, just keep it going.
Exactly. And just resistance to change in general, right? And so, right, I read something today that Mitch McConnell's calculus is that Trump is going to lose, which is a good calculus. I mean, he might not lose, right? I mean, we really don't know what's going to happen.
We still don't know.
We still really don't know, but it doesn't look good. And certainly, if you are Mitch McConnell, you are hedging your bets, because you're saying to yourself, I am not going to have the Senate probably. Maybe I'll still have the Senate, but I won't have the presidency after this. Right. And I should assume that. And that's a rational thing to assume if you're Mitch McConnell. So they're going to ram this through. And then even if they have to do it in a lame duck session, they're going to ram this through. And again, this is all about protecting the interests of the fossil fuel industry. And that's why, Mitch McConnell has been singularly focused on judges, because he knows they are above the voters, right? We can't vote. We don't vote for judges. So this is a way to, if you want to reduce accountability and still stay in power, this is how you do it.
Yeah, and plus, I mean, they directly have been attacking voting rights, as we discussed last time with John Roberts, and so I would fully assume that Amy Coney Barrett would be pro-corporate, anti-voting, all the rest of it, because that is the only place they have to go.
Exactly. That is it. That's it. They have painted themselves into this corner. They have painted themselves in this corner because they refuse to change. They refuse to go and change policy such that it is palatable to a majority of voters.
Yeah. Well, let's hear from our guest. Joseph Occhipinti is a graduate of McGill University. He has a degree in human geography. As a geographer, he focuses on spatial patterns and dynamics. He is also a professor. He is a writer, a nature blogger, and considers himself an explorer of both places and ideas. He has been working to educate others both in the classroom and on social media about climate change for many years, and more recently, the emerging threat of COVID-19. So without further delay, we bring you Joseph Occhipinti. Welcome back to the show, Joe. I'm so happy you decided to come hang out with us again. How have you been?
Thank you. I've been great. It's been, I really enjoyed the last time I hung out with you guys here, and we had a great talk, and I'm looking forward to another really good talk we're going to have today.
Yeah, we are too. So I guess we'll just let you kick it off, because we're here to discuss climate.
Okay. Well, first of all, I guess I'll show you my shirt, right? So it's my Green New Deal, as I stand up here. And
nice.
Very nice.
The reason I wore this one, obviously, we're talking about climate change, but we're also talking about how climate change is being portrayed and the politics behind it. And the Green New Deal is like central to that right now. And so it's probably a good thing to really bring up in this conversation. So first of all, I'll tell you that I taught climate change in university level for several years. And so I did a lot of research to prepare for that and to be able to convey to my students it was a gen ed class, so it wasn't a high upper level class. Well, 200 level, so it's kind of in the middle. And we talked a lot about the science behind it, but also to try to convey what's going on in terms of our society, culture, and our politics behind this issue. And so in that experience, I learned how to, or I focused on how to really convey what's going on with a clear language without using a lot of terminology and a lot of scientific jargon. So hopefully I can help with that.
Why don't you take us through, like your first, when you're giving like a first day lecture or something like that, just a brief synopsis of what you present to these kids? Because I imagine, it's hard because, I mean, it's such a big issue and it's going to affect these kids' lives for the rest of their lives, and all of us, of course. But, when you're young, you got your whole life ahead of you. What do you tell them?
And in fact, I actually begin with that typically. I talk about how this issue is really central and important to their lives, and how it's a living issue. It's not a theoretical issue. It's not just something that is going to happen in the future, but it's a living force on this planet that we're dealing with. And so I talk about it in those terms. And then I really ask them what they know. And I start with that and see where I'm at with students. And generally speaking, I find that a lot of students are already aware of the issue, and for the most part, I get a few climate deniers here and there, but being in Massachusetts, not that many. I mean, it's part of the country is pretty progressive. But occasionally I will. I remember one time when I taught this class, I ended up getting like sort of religious right-wing literature in my mailbox about how climate change was really a hoax and how God really wanted something else. I'm like, oh boy, here we go.
Oh boy,
but
here we go.
The key thing is to make people connected to the issue, that it's not just intellectual, right? That it's an issue of great value and importance. And so I talk a lot about, first of all, I frame what climate change is, right? And the important thing that we need to think about with that is that the change is a real important part of the phrase, because climates, humanity and all of nature co-evolve with climate. And so species adapt to climate, whether you're plants or animals and so forth, over, geologic time, long periods of time. And so when climate change happens abruptly, there's that disconnect, that symbiosis breaks, right? And that then leads us to the real fundamental problem of climate change, which is extinction, right? Species loss. And we're living through a mass extinction right now, which has absolutely profound implications beyond even just sea level rise and forest fires and all of the other many things we could talk about in terms of consequences. But with that species loss, we've lost, in terms of, if you count up, not the number of species, but the number of animals overall, right, that belong in those species, we've lost a tremendous amount of that diversity already. In the last 40 years, two major studies have come out that show as much as 2/3 of animal life is gone already. 2/3.
Yeah, that's really stunning. And there's a lot of climate grief, which is masquerading as other psychological symptoms that people are having.
Yeah.
Do you ever address that in your class?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Tell us about that. Tell us about that. I hadn't even thought about it from that perspective.
Well, I went through it myself. I mean, at one point I was really grieving. And even up to recent times, I was really grieving for us, for humanity and the planet, because it really, for a while, to me, it looked extremely dire. I'm a little more optimistic now. I can talk a little bit about that later, but there is that phenomena with climate scientists and with people who really work with this, of feeling this grief, this depression that comes over you. And some people have actually left the field because of it, because there's this disconnect between what they're seeing and what they're trying to convey scientifically to the world, and the resistance against it, the denial against it. It's just such a huge disconnect that it really is friggin' depressing.
That's really fascinating, Joe. If I could just jump in for a second here, just because, The analogy that popped right into my head just now is to things like white privilege, right? Things like the experience of just being black or being a person of color, or frankly being a woman, although I don't have that personal experience. But what you do have is these people who are denying that, right? Who say like, oh no, your lived experience is just not true, right? And you're saying like, hey, look, we have this scientific evidence. I know science, right? And I'm telling you, this is true. And they're like, yeah, no, we're just not, we don't care that you have truth, We just don't care about that.
Yeah, that's a great point. There really is a parallel there, right? People who experience, this tremendous history of, oppression and segregation and marginalization, and then we get to a point in our society when finally we're starting to break free from some of that, and we've made some strides, and then the hammer comes down and says, "No, fuck you."
Yep.
Right? We're not going to take it anymore. You can't have that freedom anymore. Because you're faking it. It's not real.
Exactly. You're faking it. It's not real. It's denial. And like you say, it's psychologically taxing, right? It really, really is. Like when you said that, I was like, oh my God, I had never thought of it that way. But of course, the idea of pushing up against that sort of that powerful denial, right, and I know that Sean, you've probably experienced this too. You've been talking about this stuff for 20 fucking years, right? Oh. And people just don't fucking listen because they don't want to hear it.
The litany of excuses and deflections is infinite. And, it's everything from, people who, back when hybrids were new and everybody was getting hybrid cars, I heard from people going, I don't know if it's reliable. The battery's going to wear out, or the battery pollutes more. And, same thing with electric cars. Now they don't want to wait 20 minutes or 40 minutes to charge at a gas station. They don't want to, it's just, there was a study that came out, and I've looked for this and I can't find it. Maybe it's anecdotal, but I'm pretty sure that it was an actual paper. And they did a survey and they asked people if they would be willing to give up any television remote for the rest of their lives if it would completely solve climate change. And they said no. 75% of people said they would not do that. And that really kind of crystallizes the whole thing for me, because whether it's, waiting a few minutes to charge your car, or whether it's, taking a risk on a new technology, or whether it's simply, changing your buying habits. Maybe, people get incensed about not being able to use plastic bags at the grocery store. Yeah. This becomes a political issue. They will literally, change their entire political party over plastic bags. There are certain people, who, and it just eclipses every other form of justice that you're dealing with. So, I've been dealing with it a long time, and it's just frightening. And I experienced it again the other day.
Well, again, this is orchestrated. The American way of life is non-negotiable. George Bush Sr., right? 2000. That ideology was placed there as a belief system, I guess. And it was easy to do because it was resonated with a lot of people's attitudes. But, there has been this very systematic process of, creating a resistance against climate change. It didn't just come organically from our culture. Because, if you look, there are some clear differences with Americans and everybody else in the world, but Americans are still human beings, right? And there are some ideological differences and historical differences. We talk about that. America's a frontier country and all that. But still, why is it so much worse here? Mm-hmm. Why is there denial so systematic and so powerful here in comparison to most other places?
I think it's because, we look at the three primary actors in the world who don't want to see us make a transition away from fossil fuels. And it is the U.S., Russia, and Saudi Arabia, with a few other lesser countries involved. But Europe is not heavily. They don't export fossil fuels. They don't have a huge stake in that, and so they've been much more willing to go along with the science on that. But here, it was. I don't know if it's true anymore, but I know that the Saudi royal family did at one point have a stake in Fox News, and there's definitely been the fossil fuel money just pushing this all the way along. And, once you get people on that track, it's like the opinion hosts they just mock whatever the latest thing is. It's like, oh, now they're going to be trying to ban hamburgers, and it's,
it's true though. It's true. I mean, this is what they say, right? This is the narrative, right? We had that piece that you and I worked on, Sean, on the just words fallacy that really sort of speaks exactly to this issue. But right, and the incentive. And for people like George Bush and George the Bushes, who were friends with the Saudi family, right, whose money is so tied up with this, right? There's perverse incentives here, and it really shows. And speaking to what you said, Joe, is I always lose my train of thought. It's one of my favorite activities, is just to lose my train of thought mid-sentence, actually. I like to think again that I'm just so brilliant that the thoughts just flash through my head at such a speed that I just can't keep up. But in all seriousness, you were talking about something that was really important. I'll get back to it.
So let's get right to the nitty-gritty, okay?
Yeah, let's do it.
Why I really want it. I'm happy to be here and talking about this, because there's a clock ticking. That's really it. 2 years ago, the IPCC, the Panel on Climate Change from the UN, said, there's a very extensive study and report. We have 12 years left to keep, the global temperature from rising above 1.5 C. And if we don't do that, a whole bunch of positive feedback could kick in, and we're out of and it's just over. Right now, it's only 10 years. So before, we had to decrease our carbon footprint by 5% a year to get to that goal. And it wasn't even some people agree it wasn't even strong enough of a goal. Right. Now we have to do 7.5% a year to get to that goal. And if Trump gets elected in 4 years, we'll have to do 15% reduction a year, which is impossible.
Impossible.
And that's also what I always point out, is that our political system is essentially tied in with planetary physics. Like, the two are now not separable. And so if, for example, Trump were to get another 4 years, there's no guarantee that the person after him would be better, because or even able to legislate, because when you talk about the 6-3 conservative Supreme Court that we might be looking at right now, a lot of climate legislation may just die. It may just be blocked and overturned by the court. So we're getting into a more and more, where, yes, it's possible to reduce our carbon emissions by X percent per year, but legally and factually, no.
No, I mean, and of course it has to be a global effort. And I mean, this administration is absolutely against global cooperation. We have left just about every single international treaty there is right? We left everything, and not just the climate change, but in all kinds of ways. And I mean, obviously, and that is even more stark, because Biden himself may not be the most radical person in the world on climate change. He's pretty good at it, actually. He's not bad. His policies his plan is not bad. But what excites me about him is that he's got all of this international connection. He's got all these friends that are world leaders. And it works at that level, even there. It's all about being friends and having that personal connection. That's how you sway others. He has that more than anybody else that I know. He really does. 40 years, and that gives us the potential for having collaboration with the rest of the world. And the rest of the world does want to do this. It's complete bullshit that they don't, right? That's what the right is pushing. Where if we were to do whatever we did, it would destroy our economy for nothing because we're only 15% of the problem. Yeah, not true. Even friggin' Pakistan has committed itself to lowering its greenhouse footprint. They have this massive reforestation project that they're working on. They've committed themselves to lowering to shutting down and not building any more coal plants. Pakistan.
Right? Yeah, and with a fraction of our per capita income, right? I mean, they can.
Oh yeah, exactly.
They can ill afford to do this, probably.
Exactly,
exactly.
All the ideological baggage that country has.
Exactly.
Well, they don't have oil, right? I mean, they're not a big oil producer. They might have a little, but You know, I don't think they're on the level of an Iran or an Iraq or a Saudi Arabia.
That's a good point. Yeah,
very good point. They don't have the same incentive. I want to tie this in a little bit to the things that we talk about here all the time, and that is we talk about hierarchy, right? And that is sort of like our hobby horse, our axe that we grind here. And we can't talk about, I think, in terms of the climate problem and the climate change issue and working internationally. Right. The Trump administration's entire thing is America first, right? So basically what that means is like, right, lack of cooperation, like you talk about with other nations. And the idea is, why should we cooperate when we can just be on top of the heap? Right? Why should we work together with other people when in doing so, we'd have to make some concessions? We'd have to tie ourselves to not real enforcement, but sort of, but commitments, right? Commitments. Right. And that is precisely anti the entire Trump approach and the entire, frankly, conservative approach, which is, again, as we talk about all the time on this show, hierarchy. And we think about Trump as being an extreme version of this, and he is. But going back to Bush back in Rio, right? He was saying the American way of life is non-negotiable, and it's non-negotiable precisely because we shouldn't have to change to accommodate anybody because we are on top of the hierarchy, right?
Yeah. Right. And I mean, you go up in space and look down, you see the globe, you see the biosphere, no hierarchy.
Exactly.
And that's not what it's about.
It isn't. And astronauts, they call it the what is it? The overview effect or something like that. When they go up and they come back a changed person. Their politics are forever changed when they've seen the Earth. But I want to point out something else about what you were talking about, Christophe, and that is that that lie is based on another lie, which is that somehow fixing the climate is going to cost us money. That is probably the biggest climate lie of all, that it will cost us money. There was a study done by the Rocky Mountain Institute with Amory Lovins, and it was in his book that he wrote. I think it was now I'm blanking on the title of it, but it was, I think, Reinventing Fire was the name of the book. And he did a comprehensive economic study where he showed that every dollar invested into climate mitigation by whatever means, whether it's research, whether it's deployment, doesn't matter, returns $10 to the economy. So what's going on here is the fossil fuels know they have a losing business model. And so they have to continue to promote this idea that it's going to cost, I mean, Trump said in the debate, $100 trillion was the cost of the Green New Deal. It's insane.
Yeah, well, that's Trump.
Yeah.
Sure is.
Well, and the other dimension we need to really address here is that the equity issue around climate change, right? Because there's food equity, there's health equity, there's social justice equity, right? And who's getting hurt, right? It's the people who can least afford to get hurt, who are already on the bottom end of the hierarchical scale. It is really, this is the biggest social justice issue there is, honestly. The consequences. Who are going to be the first refugees? Who are going to be the first people starving, because of food shortages? Who are going to be the first people that have to deal with living in countries where it's literally going to be too hot to be outside without environmental suits?
Yeah.
It is people of color.
Absolutely.
Right? It is poor people.
Well,
it's
being that the world's 80% of the world's population is brown or black, you have this. So we're 4% of the world's population in the U.S., and we are blocking the rest of the world from literally saving their lives.
And I mean, it will affect America too, for sure. I mean, it'll be devastating here as well. Not as fast, though. Right.
We have more resources to deal with it. We have, we can build a new seawall if we have to. Some of these places in the rest of the world will not do that. They'll just be inundated, and they'll be, have to move.
Yeah, I mean, you can see this in terms of, I think perhaps a good analogy here is to think about how COVID-19 has impacted various classes of people, various groups of people, right? In India, they are reeling from this, right? Because they just don't, right? There's so many people living in so many and so tight-packed environments, right? They do not have the resources. Right. And even here in the United States, right, you have black and brown people are suffering at way higher rates than everybody else. Right. And meanwhile, well-off white suburban folks and people like me, right? People like us, probably on this call, right? Who are relatively safe and we're doing fine, right? Savings are up, and everybody's nice and healthy and safe. You know, if you don't have to leave your house, but you know, so if you have to leave your house to get fucking water every day, though, right? You know, just as a minimum. You know, where do you even begin to sort of recover from this?
Yeah. And I mean, Pakistan is doing it not from the goodness of their heart to help the world. They're in trouble. They know they are.
Right.
You know, the glaciers melting in the Himalayas, that's their water supply. You know,
right.
Oh, interesting.
They're experiencing extreme heat and temperatures like they haven't experienced before in the large swaths of their country. The monsoon rains have been altered already, causing them stress. I mean, it's like, it's real for them. This is why they're changed. They want to do this. And it's coming out of that reality.
Well, they've been getting everyone, all of us, get a certain amount of ecosystem services for free that we have relied upon. You know, if a stream is flowing by your city every year and it's coming from a melting glacier, that's free water that you don't have to pay for. You just collect it, right? You have to treat it maybe, but you know, you don't have to, you know, if that glacier wasn't there, you've got to haul water in to wherever you are. You got to try to drill wells. And if the wells go dry, you know, there's all these ecosystem services that we use that we have not been paying for. And all of a sudden now, the bills are coming due and the poorest people aren't going to be able to pay for the basic necessities.
Absolutely. I mean, you're right, Sean. And the other part I wanted to mention in terms of what's possible, one of the denial strategies or denials, psychological complexes that you see out there today, we were talking about this earlier, is the idea that it's too late.
Yeah.
We might as well just enjoy ourselves, be on top of the food chain, have a great economy, drive our SUVs. It's too late. The world's fucked anyway. So not true. Mm-hmm. Not true. It's not too late. In fact, the latest scientific models, the new models that they've been incorporating different new equations that we've learned about, for example, the atmospheric ocean interchange, right? The carbon cycle and so forth. We've inputted those into new models, which are showing that the old idea, the old consensus that we have decades of momentum of increasing heat, even if we were to stop our emissions, is not true. That the world will respond much faster because the ocean is incredibly powerful in this, and it will draw down much of the carbon in the atmosphere if we give it a chance to. So instead of having to wait 30 years to see the benefits of our actions, we only really will have to wait 3, 5, 6, 7 years. That's it.
Wow.
And then
that's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. I hadn't heard that. That's really great news because what I'd always heard is that, like, you know, CO2 is forever. Once it's in the air, you know. Yeah. That's great.
Michael Mann, right?
Michael Mann. Well, he's one of the originals. He's the OG climate guy.
Curve and all that. He's the one that did this study that I was reading about.
Yeah, well, that's great. That's good news.
Some of the only good news I've heard from on the climate area. You know what I mean? The rest of it's just shitty. You know, it's just awful.
We're on the high end of expectations, right? The predictions we're coming on the high end, and in some cases, way over exceeding the predicted outcomes. With, like, for example, with ice melt and so forth. And so it's really, really dire. But it's not over. We're going to have to adapt to a changing climate for sure, no matter what. Massive adaptation, right? But it's not an end of the world scenario. It doesn't have to be. We can make it work, right?
And the difference between that, you know, real end of the world scenario where, I mean, like, I've heard projections along the lines of, because what you get is like what you said, it gets too hot for people to be outside. And these are agrarian economies. These are places where, you know, people are working in construction, they're working, you know, hard labor. And so large portions of the year, they can't be outside. So, you know, what do? And a lot of them don't have air conditioning either. So, and this goes back to studies they did, I think, in the a long time ago. You know, the military did studies about what was the maximum temperature that soldiers could operate in, and it has to do with the humidity, a direct relationship between humidity. Wet bulb temperature, yeah. And I talk about this all the time. It's a little arcane, but basically the idea is if you are sweating and the air is humid, your sweat doesn't evaporate, you get no cooling. So that's what a lot of people don't understand, is that in a dry climate, you can tolerate 110 degrees, but in a wet climate, maybe it's 85 or 90, and it really, you reach the limit of human endurance where you start having heat stroke.
I think it was, but in Saudi Arabia, the wet bulb temperature reached 165 degrees like a year ago. Like a combination of humidity, and that's just not survivable. I mean, if it happened in a flash and then it went back down, but it still reached that level. We're seeing northern India exceed what's theoretically a livable wet bulb temperature now on occasion.
Wow.
And the other thing is, people don't understand that there are already about 20 million climate refugees, maybe not completely related to climate, but where climate is a significant factor, including a lot of the refugees coming from Central America that are undocumented, right? They've had an extensive drought for the last decade that has undermined their agrarian society. A lot of people are migrating into the cities because they cannot. They're dying in the rural areas, right. And then there's no place in the city, so they go and they try to travel north into the United States, and and even in the United States alone, right? I think there's a little over 1 million right now climate people that have had to move because of climate disruptions already in the United States. So it's already happening. It's not getting the press that it needs to get, and ostensibly because so much else is going on, but.
Well, and this is it's a little bit of an odd time to do this show, but not, because I think it's related. I mean, because you look at some of these scenarios, and like you said, a million climate refugees inside the United States. That's huge. I mean, that's huge, right? And
I wouldn't say refugees, but people who have been affected because they've been able to move to new areas, but they've had to move.
Technically, they had to pick up their house and leave. So
right.
Yeah.
I guess so. Technically, it would be, but
well, like the Gulf Coast, especially, right? Like you see down there in Louisiana, where the maps are just no longer accurate, right? Like the down at the southern end of Louisiana, southern sort of Gulf Coast of Louisiana, right? Like that's all becoming wet marsh, unlivable land, right? You see these maps that say Louisiana has X amount of space at the bottom, but really that's actually not livable. That's just water now, and this is continuing to happen, right? South Florida, all these areas, and this is not even setting aside the fucking hurricanes, right? Like the outrageous hurricanes, right?
That's a good point for stuff. Yeah.
Go ahead, Joseph.
Actually, I read recently a statistic about that. Louisiana is losing a football field every 100 minutes.
Wow.
That is astonishing. Astonishing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, and what this translates into, is you see how refugees are treated worldwide.
Oh, yeah.
In Europe, refugees have destabilized many of the European governments. Refugees destabilized our government. I mean, Trump got in on an anti-refugee platform.
So true.
Now fast forward to the point where it's not 20 million refugees. It's 100 million, 500 million, right? Or people who are literally, they can't get food. I mean, theoretically, the rest of the world would respond and ship in food. But, once these things start to bite, people start hoarding for themselves. They start not wanting to share, and they certainly don't want anybody else coming into their country.
Yeah.
So you got this massive northward migration. In order to stay in habitable zones, you could see, if we had a 4-degree scenario or something like that, you could see the potential for several hundred million, maybe even billions of people moving. Either people in the United States going to Canada. Canada doesn't have any. If people in the United States decide they want to take over Canada or move into Canada, they're going to do it. It's just not even a question, and the same thing will happen in, the big swaths of land in Siberia and Russia. Those areas could become major new food belts, as the climate moves northward, right?
But it's not as easily as you think. I mean, people have this idea that, we'll just have more warm areas we can move to. Yeah. But again, remember that climate and species and co-evolve. So once you disrupt the climate, it's going to take a long time for those areas to actually develop a new ecology.
Right.
It's not going to happen like overnight. You're just going to pick up, it's going to be warm here, so we'll just have warm climate and a biome that's going to be warm. It doesn't happen that way. What happens is massive forest fires and whole-scale changes of the ecology. And as far as going back to the refugee thing, during the 1920s and 30s, we had the Dust Bowl years. right? And we had millions of refugees leaving the Midwest and the Great Plains going west into California. You know that for about 10 days, the state of Colorado actually sent the military to block the refugees, and then eventually the courts had to step in and they stopped them from doing that. But they were literally setting up border checkpoints within states in the United States to stop these refugees from entering the states. You know, this happens. You know, it happens.
Wow.
Happened in our own country.
We can guarantee it's going to happen way worse. I mean, and what happens then is that it affects elections, you know, assuming that we even are going to continue to have elections, right? At a certain point, it threatens democracy entirely, because you get, you know, these people are there with their torches and they don't want anybody to, this is our land, this is blood and soil, you know, and climate just feeds right into that major destabilization.
It really does. It's incredibly destabilizing. Now, a great example, a great analog is to look at what's happening with this pandemic, how destabilizing that has been, how we've dealt with it. And the turmoil around protesting, masks, and all of that stuff that happened, things that you would think would be non-issue or a small issue, are huge issues. And there's something about the turmoil, there's something about that state of change, rapid change, that's really destabilizing. And, you know, we've seen what's going on with the pandemic. Our current government has not been able to deal with it. I mean, they weren't even able to protect themselves. I mean, we have a super spreader event in Washington, D.C., caused by the very top of our government.
Exactly. We're just talking about that in our intro segment. I mean, it's like it's utter insanity, you know. And you know, again, it's something like as simple as wearing masks, right? So you might think to yourself, oh, well, you know, everybody would want other people to have clean water. Well, not necessarily. If they have to give some up, you know, there'll be people who will want to keep filling their swimming pools when other people don't have enough water to drink. That's the kind of inequities we're dealing with climate.
Yeah, right. Right, and I had this conversation earlier with some friends, and people are like really down on humans. Oh, humans are suck. You know, they're so bad, they're terrible. Look at how, you know, it goes all with this, you know, this issue of like people, you know, wishing Trump ill and all this stuff. Look how evil people are. I'm like, look, this is nothing new. This is humanity. Humans are humans. We are built this way. We evolved this way. When we are threatened, we get angry and hostile. And people are threatened by Trump, so they're going to react in an angry and hostile way. Get used to it. This is a humanity, right? Yeah. And, you know, it's what you talk a lot about, Sean, about the human perfectibility being like the goal. It is not going to happen, right? Unless we have, you know, maybe, you know, with superhumans, or, you know, what they call them now, post-humans, or
the singularity.
But aside from that, right? We have to build a civil society that nurtures the good.
Yeah, that's a great point. Such a great point.
And part of that is accountability. And the reason why people are angry with Trump is because Trump basically did this to himself. And not only did he do this to himself, but he did this to 200,000 Americans or plus, you know, more than that. But
and all the families that are mourning and all the people who are sick, who are going to have, you know, lifetime conditions. It's a lot of people.
Absolutely. And pre-existing conditions, right, going forward, right? And this is something that he wants to get rid of. I wanted to talk too about, you were talking about the human animal. I think a lot of the resistance that we see on the left and the right, it's from recognizing that the human being is an animal, and just like any other animal, if you threaten it, it will respond violently. Of course, it will. I mean, if you corner an animal and threaten it, it will bite you. That is what we are animals just like that. We even still have the canines. They're small now. They're small now, but we still have them. We still have them, right? Yeah, and sometimes people bite. And sometimes people bite people. Kids still bite people, right? Kids still bite when they get pissed. They still bite, right? So my point is that, look, right, when human beings are threatened, right? Let's back up even, and let's talk about human beings being threatened by AI, by losing jobs, by outsourcing, and what was their response? elect Donald Trump, right? He was going to be the person who was going to fight back for them, right? It happens over and over and over again. We saw it during the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. People stopped being nice and start hoarding toilet paper, right? This is what happens. This is what happens. This is what we do. It's what we do. We have, like you say, Joe, we have to put structures, societal structures that nurture the best of us, the best of what it is to be a human being, and also that put the guardrails on all of our negative things. You know?
Yeah, and what ends up happening is that all of these issues start to come together. That, like social justice, poverty, wealth inequality, and all of these things, they start to come together and they become the same issue. Secularism. That's why we felt that the secular is really the nexus of all of it, because it's the nexus of justice. When you bring in these hierarchical or God-based systems, they deny the human animal, they deny scientific solutions, and it's all part of the same problem. The solution starts with a strong separation of church and state and a strong governmental support for science.
Right. If a theocratic or even a soft theocratic society cannot solve the problems that we need to solve. It can't. A very highly ideological, highly nationalistic society cannot solve the problem that we need to solve. They cannot solve diseases and pandemics. It cannot solve the coming of the fourth industrial revolution and all that. It cannot solve the economic crisis we're in. It cannot solve climate change. We need to have a secular global community to do that, right? It is the glue. It's the foundation.
Well, it's really accepting knowledge. When knowledge is presented, when you have true facts that are presented, no matter who they're threatening to, that has to be accepted. And I ran across a story I wanted to talk about, because this is really, we see this also as a fight against fascism, is like, I have on my shirt, but fascism is not the Proud Boys. The Proud Boys are just the enforcers of what really fascism is. It's the attack on history and science and truth. And we've seen everything that Trump has done has been in opposition to that. And so this article that I came across is that Russia just jailed a historian who uncovered the mass graves, some additional mass graves that they didn't know about, that Stalin had filled with bodies. And his thing is that he's been harassed for a long time, like as anybody is, like Russia has a long history of doing this, both under Soviet times and now currently increasingly. And this guy was sentenced to 13 years in prison. And he originally had been sentenced just to 3 years, but then somebody high up, I'm not going to read this whole article, but they decided that he, needed to be punished more harshly, and so they trumped up some pedophilia and child pornography charges against him. And this is like this 65-year-old historian, and like he's into child pornography. This is so typical fascism, and this is our future if we don't get this under control.
Right. So when we see things like the Trump administration saying that racial history is indoctrination, and we have to put a stop to it. It's not even history. Racial sensitivity training is a threat, right? That resonates with that kind of ideology, that kind of thinking, and we don't take it lightly. We can't take it lightly. It's not we're not seeing massive death camps yet, so it's not that bad. But listen, we want to be proactive. We don't want to get to that point.
That's such a great point, and that really ties it right in some ways to the way the human animal sort of thinks about these sort of long-term problems, right? So, and this ties right into climate change, right? Because that's why we're here with climate change, because it's one of these things that's a can that's so easy to kick down the road, because we don't see now we are seeing it, but in the past, right, in the 1980s, it wasn't obvious that the climate change was happening, right? And so. And I make this stupid analogy all the time because we don't know that it's really true, but the frog in the boiling water analogy, right? And this is a recurring joke on the Radical Secular, because we actually don't know if frogs really do that, and we probably don't think that frogs do that. And the idea is that if you put a frog in water and slowly, if you slowly turn up the temperature, it'll stay there and cook. And I don't think that's really true, but the analogy is a good one, because it's the same thing that we do with climate change, and it's the same thing that we're doing right now with creeping fascism and theocracy. One day, it's not like they flip a switch and one day women don't have the right to vote. It happens over the course of a long time, right? That's how these sort of things happen.
And Sean, I think you hit the nail on the head. We have to look at the core of what fascism means and what it is, not the after effects of it, right? And it's this assault on knowledge, right? It really is. It's the assault on knowledge that allows it to flourish and happen. That's the a priori thing that has to happen first.
Well, and we know that there's the tragedy of Lysenkoism in Stalinist Russia, where he was basically overturning science and applying bad science to crop production, and it caused a famine. Right. So this is the same thing. There's no difference between that and what's going on with climate change right now.
No difference at all. Or, by the way, for the pandemic, right? And we talked about Trump earlier in the show. This is the problem, right? This is when these sort of ideologies and this nationalism runs head on into reality, right? Because science is science, whether you believe it or not. And so, and then here we are, 200,000 people dead, and the leader of the free world has COVID-19. And by the way, he's overweight and obese and all these things, and he's not healthy. So here we are.
And the question of Schadenfreude, and which is in our show title, is really about those of us who are watching this unfolding disaster, watching people die needlessly, are angry. And we want to see the person held accountable, punished. And so sometimes that comes along and saying, well, I wish he would just croak of coronavirus, But at the same time, if he did croak, it would be his own natural consequences coming home to roost. No liberal would have killed him if he dies of coronavirus, right? And no matter how much we wish or don't wish, there's this whole thing. It's so, vulgar for liberals to wish for him to die. But it's like, you know what? Honestly, we would have nothing to do with it. We just what do you think about it?
There is that aspect of, accountability, right? And comeuppance, you did it to yourself. But also there's another aspect to it, I think, that I was thinking about. The analogy I would say is like, let's say you're walking along and you see this kid in the river drowning, okay? And you want to rescue that kid. And some guy comes in front of you and says, there's no kid there. He's not drowning. I'm not going to let you go by. Fuck you. I'm not. Yeah. Right? It's fake. There's no kid there, but you see the kid and he's drowning. And what are you going to do? You're going to sit there and say, oh, okay, I'm sorry. Talk to them and be civil. No, you're going to push.
You might shoot the guy. Out of the way. You might shoot the guy. Right?
You're going to push him hard as you can out of the way.
Yeah.
And then go after that kid. Right. And that's how a lot of people are feeling right now. Like, we are in a crisis. We're seeing people dying. Right. And you want me to be nice and not push that guy out of the way.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
no.
When it comes to,
he has to move.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
When it comes to the billions of potential climate victims, I mean, you could, the very, very serious estimates, if we go to a 4-degree scenario, would be billions of casualties. Okay. And those are serious estimates. That's not just like Chicken Little, nonsense. That's serious casualties based on food production, based on geography, based on, who would have to move where, what the temperatures would be in various places in the world, could be billions of casualties. So, if those of us who are activists, say to ourselves, hey, these fossil fuel executives and these politicians should have their heads on pikes, right? And, it's like, and everybody goes, no, you can't say that. But it's like, well, who's speaking for these billions of potential victims? And so if you actually go to the numbers of people who have names and addresses, they have bank accounts, we know exactly who they are, politicians and, very, very wealthy business people are the ones who are going to kill those you want the metaphor of the kid in the stream or the billions of people, however you want to slice it. These are people who are going to cause great harm in the future. So why shouldn't we want them dead? It would be harm reduction, right? It's trolley problem again.
It really, really is. And this is a utilitarian calculus we're talking about here.
The only problem,
No, go
the
ahead.
only problem I see is that we have to be strategic about how we go about it, because the right is incredibly good at deflecting and blaming and going on the offensive, and all of a sudden the left is,
we're the violent ones. We're the ones, somebody will quote me from this show and say, he wants to put fossil fuel executives' heads on pikes. But the point is when the rule of law has broken down, and when you're sitting here and this is drowning kid, which is humanity. That's the metaphor for humanity in that river. And so you see that, and you want to push these guys out of the way, whatever way, jail, kill them, put their heads on pikes. I mean, ultimately, they don't matter. Their lives are insignificant compared to the people who are going to die in the future, and how it's going to change human history. I mean, to the point where we've never had an event that big in human history.
Isn't it
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just saying, isn't there like an analogy to be made here, right? Like I think I lost my train of thought again.
What were you saying,
Trolley problem. Go ahead, Joe. Go ahead, Joe. It'll come back to me.
So it really is a matter primarily of trying to do what we can to reduce human suffering. Right? That's the ethical part here. Yeah, there's this discussion about being mean to Trump or being cruel or saying cruel things is a deflection from that. It's a distraction. They try to place the onus of evil on people who care about the world, right? And I don't really, one of the things I think we should do is be smart about not being dragged into that fight.
I agree. I've had so many years of frustration of watching this unfolding scenario in front of me. It's like, you just kind of go, if we could just get these people out of the way who are blocking. I mean, because ultimately people want clean jobs. They want clean energy. They want all of these things. And we're almost being prevented. I mean, it's like Trump's mileage standards, rolling back the mileage standards. It's like the car companies were already making it. They were already doing it. No. Why are you rolling it back?
They were okay with it. They were okay with it. They liked the structure. They liked their predictability. It helped their business model. They were willing to do it. And all of a sudden he comes along and just smashes it.
I mean, they see the writing on the wall, right? I mean, and that's the thing about corporations in general. They are the most rational actors of rational actors. They respond directly to incentives in a way that human individuals do not, right? And so, or they do, we do, but not in that sort of hyper rational way. And so they saw the writing on the wall. And by the way, they still see the writing on the wall. They know that Trump's not going to be around forever. They see that, look, the future is in electric cars. Electric cars are coming out all the time, right? They're like every company now is producing an electric car. And so they see the writing on the wall here. And in terms of comparing, the millions of billions of people to the lives of one CEO and I'm not advocating murder or death or anything like that. Obviously, I do think though that as a practical matter, right, like these people are doing grievous harm. And I think there's a false equivalence that goes on here, that it's like, oh no, we don't want this little individual to be harmed. And meanwhile, we overlook these sort of billions of people. And I wonder how that's, again, this sort of the problem with the human brain is that it's hard to wrap your mind around millions of people. An individual is easy, right? This is a trolley problem, really. It embodied the trolley problem, right? Right. Pushing the fat man onto the tracks feels like I'm murdering somebody, but really, in not doing that, I'm murdering way more people. Way more people.
And it's not even that, because like Sean, you said, nobody's hurting Trump. He's hurting himself.
Exactly.
Nobody's doing anything to him. Right.
No one's doing a damn thing.
Not even pulling that lever. All it is like, the idea that if he suffers and it leads to much less suffering for humanity, it's a worthy thing. It's worth it.
That's a W. That's a W.
He is paying so that he can understand. If people, they have not learned yet. 9 months, they have not learned yet. They're doing the same stuff over and over. They're
doubling down.
Social distancing and masks for whatever reason. They do it a little bit. It works, and then they use the fact that it works to stop doing it.
Yeah,
and they keep doing that over and over.
Yeah,
it's been like three iterations of that now, right?
And we're seeing the same thing happen with climate. And it's like, hey, we actually are running out of time because of this shorter segment. So I want to just give you the opportunity, Joe, to give any sort of final thoughts on the climate situation and COVID and whatever else.
Well, I mean, I advocate for political change, right? Peaceful political change in these elections. That's what we have to focus on. Number one, right? We can get distracted with other things, but we shouldn't. We should really focus on election, the electoral process, changing. You know, you want to push these people out of the way. Well, this is the way to do it, right? You elect them out, right? And that's the first and foremost thing, because we're running out of time. And people say, you know, you say billions of people could die, and people like roll their eyes and say that's just hype. Right? It's not hype. It's not hype.
It's already starting to happen. We're starting to see, you know, casualties.
A 4-degree rise in global temperature is a civilization busting event. And once civilization goes, the only way we have 8 billion people in this world is because we have the structure to maintain them. That's civilization. Once that goes, you know, billions of people would die. They would. It's not hype, right?
It's not a question. Those people who understand systems know that this is absolutely true. Well, I want to thank you so much for being with us, and you know, we will, I'm sure, have you back again, because it's always a great conversation, Joe.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a good conversation. It was, and we need to have more. And I thank you for doing this work, gentlemen. And I'll keep watching.
Absolutely.
We love you, Joe. You are radically secular.
Well, it was pretty awesome having Joe on again. He's always so good, and I just wish we could have more time to pick his brains.
For sure, man. So Joe is I've never actually met him in person, because I've only met him on the internet, and
nor have I.
Yeah, and through you, but I really love him. I'm friends with him on Facebook, and so I follow him, and he's really prolific in terms of the stuff he writes, and really thoughtful. In fact, he's going to be writing the next piece, I think, that's going to be coming out not this in 2 Thursdays from now, on Just Words Fallacy, is going to be from him, actually. So it's actually pretty fitting that he was with us today, and he is so super radical. He's radically secular, man, and it was just such a great discussion. He has really just sort of he's a really thoughtful guy, and he has I think he's really able to tie everything together into that sort of why climate change is a social justice issue.
Well, and that's really true, because whenever we fail at a collective action problem, okay, it is always malfeasance. It's because when humans work together, you know, we can accomplish anything. It's like Joe Biden says, you know, United States of America has never failed at anything that it set its mind to accomplishing. But when you have this malfeasance, this constant, you know, just drumbeat of pressure, of money and power, just preventing us. I mean, the costs where we could be as a nation and a world versus where we are, it's just sabotage. We've been sabotaged repeatedly and for decades now. And there's actually, I wanted to mention, there's a really good short documentary I want to recommend that everybody watch. It's called The Full Story of Trump and COVID-19. It's from Now This Politics. And it's only
great.
Yeah, it's a half an hour, and it just lays out the whole thing. It lays out every warning, every, you know, and the funny thing is, I'm watching it and I'm going, you know, you could make one like this on climate, of all the warnings and all of the how things were thrown out. You know, good people, good scientists were fired. Toadies and people who are loyal and paid off were brought in. You know, and who don't represent the people. And we have just basically had government by fossil fuels since Reagan came into office. And this is, you know, I think when we beat fossil fuels, we beat fascism.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That is such a great point. And you know, it is. And until you and I started this project and started talking more extensively and became friends, closer friends over the last 5 years or whatever it's been, I really didn't put together that the climate change and the fossil fuels, right? Mm-hmm. We talked about that. We talked about this in the article that we wrote together, right? The fossil fuel mafia, right? It is what is behind. When you boil it down, we do a lot of trying to boil on this show, right? We boil things down to hierarchy. We boil things down to what is, boil this thing down. We talked with Joe about this a lot. We boil this down to the foibles of the human animal, right? These bedrock concepts that I think are so important for people to understand. And the fossil fuel aspect of this cannot be overstated. It cannot be overstated that what we're dealing with here, right? These are people who are clawing and fighting, and they are a cornered animal right now. And we are poking them with a rake. We are poking them with a rake right now, and they're pissed about it.
And what you have to understand too about fossil fuels psychologically is that, and I'll just go through this real quick, but every barrel of oil is equivalent to about 3 years of human labor. And you can do the math. I've done it. That's what it is. 3 years of human labor. You can buy it for about $40. And so it's incredibly empowering. Anybody who can go out and buy diesel fuel and put it into a truck, magnifies their strength by like 100, or 500 or whatever, to be able to do anything, whether it's, tow a trailer or whatever the kind of things they want to do. And so it's incredibly empowering for people, which is extremely seductive. And so the idea that renewable energy is going to come along and take that away from them is like this. It's created all this hostility and the coal rolling and the jacked up trucks. It's like, you want to take it away? No, we're going to get bigger trucks. The Dodge Ram, the new Dodge Ram that's coming out, gets 12 miles per gallon.
I mean,
what are you doing?
What are you doing? What the hell are you doing, man? What the hell are you doing? And by the way, this is a really great, these are the same guys who want their guns, right? And it's the same thing, right? It is empowering. You get to hold that power in your hands and feel, right? And it's the same thing with those big trucks, right? They feel there and they feel big, they feel strong. And that's a really great point, Sean. The idea that, and it's cheap. It's fucking cheap. $40. You fill your tank one of that Dodge Ram, you probably cost you about $100 to fill.
$100, yeah.
$100 to fill that tank, right? It cost me $30 to fill mine, but $100 to fill that. $40 to fill my tank, $100 to fill that. But and also it also burns it at like 4 times the speed that my car does. On top of all that. But the point is that you get to feel like a swinging dick, tough guy, right? And it's the same every time. And by the way, if you've got your sidearm, your handgun with you, and your AR-15 in the back, you feel even bigger.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's it, and that's what we're up against, and so it all again comes together, and that's what we do here on the Radical Secular, and so. I'd like to remind everybody to make sure and subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please be sure to hit that red subscribe button and be sure to give us a 5-star rating. Tell your friends and family about our show, Word of Mouth Matters, and check out the Just Words Fallacy Medium publication. The link is in the show notes. And look, thanks everyone for being here. And remember, wherever you are, you can be radically secular.